Top 10 worst Lamborghinis in history. Please, all sissies and the offended turn this video off. There will be facts and nothing but facts. Be prepared for that. Here we go. First, the Lamborghini LM002, the automotive equivalent of a Rubik's Cube for those who were looking for a way to burn money even faster than gasoline. Introduced to the world in 1986, this monster embodied everything Lamborghini thought appropriate to cram into an SUV, plus the kitchen sink. Let's start with the design, which screams, "I want to be a Hummer, but with an Italian accent." This is that rare case where the designers apparently decided that brutality is something that can be enhanced by simply bolting on more corners and pumping the wheels to a size that makes pedestrians fearful. The LM002 looks like it was designed by someone who's heard stories about off-roaders, but has never seen one. The Countach's V12 engine was, of course, lip-smacking. In reality, however, it meant that the LM002 could consume fuel at such a rate that owners were beginning to think about buying an oil well. Who would have thought that 450 horsepower would be greedily drinking gasoline? Like students drinking champagne at graduation. Production of the LM002 was as exclusive as the car itself. Only about 300 lucky people were able to see if they really had more money than common sense by purchasing this marvelous machine. And yes, each of these copies cost as much as a small island in the Pacific Ocean. Exclusivity? Undoubtedly. Practicality? Not a chance in hell. In the end, the Lamborghini LM002 will forever go down in history as an absurd, overdone, and unnecessarily expensive way to get from point A to point B, but on such a grand scale that even the chic start crying about the cost of gasoline. Will we remember it as an iconic failure? No doubt. But it's the kind of failure that's nice to look at until it's time to fill up. Second, one shining example of how sports cars shouldn't be made is the Lamborghini Espada. If you've ever dreamed of a Lamborghini that could accommodate your entire family, then congratulations. The Espada is your worst nightmare on wheels come true. Launched in 1968 and produced until 1978, the Espada was a 4-seat GT car that attempted to combine practicality with typical Lamborghini madness. The result? Well, let's just say imagine a ballet tutu on a bodybuilder. The Espada looked like a long, low-slung creature that someone had accidentally stretched out during an experiment in the designer's Frankenstein lab. Externally, the car suggested that the designers were trying to create something like a family car, but had forgotten that Lamborghini is still Lamborghini, and moderation is not the best way to go. Inside, the Espada offered very Spartan amenities, especially for a car that cost like a small house. Yes, it could fit 4 adults, but only if they were brave enough to agree to spend more than 5 minutes in this metal monster. Espada drivers often joked that the only way to enjoy a ride in this car was to look at it from the outside while it was parked in a parking lot. The V12 engine certainly added to the Espada's fiery temperament, but given the car's size and weight, it was more like an angry bull stuck in a China boutique. Fuel consumption was such that every trip to the gas station turned into an economic tragedy. All in all, the Lamborghini Espada is an amazing example of how a brand known for its finicky sports cars decided to compromise and create a family car. But as we all know, in the world of Lamborghini, the word compromise more often than not just means another fanciful idea that will probably end in failure. Third, let's talk about the Lamborghini Urraco, a car that seems to have been created on one of those days when Lamborghini engineers decided that the world really needed a more affordable Lamborghini, but forgot that the word affordable is not next to top quality in their vocabulary. The Lamborghini Urraco, introduced in 1970, was conceived as Lamborghini's answer to the Porsche 911 and Ferrari Dino. The idea sounded great on paper, to create a smaller, cheaper, and more practical sports car. However, once the Urraco left the drawing tables, it became apparent that cheap and Lamborghini was a combination prone to problems, with a design that could only be described as experimental, and that's putting it mildly. The Urraco looked like it had been assembled from leftovers found in the back of the factory. It was one of those cars that you look at and think, oh well, it's definitely a Lamborghini, isn't it? In an attempt to make the sports car more affordable, many of the elements that make a Lamborghini special were simplified to the point where they were no longer admirable. Under the hood of the Urraco sits a V8, which in itself was already a departure from the standard monumental V12S. Why not make less horsepower if we've already decided to save money on everything? Was apparently the thinking at Lamborghini. This engine had a tendency to overheat, and its reliability was as impressive as the Urraco's ability to get past the service center without stopping. As you might expect, the Urraco was not a sales hit. Production was rife with problems, with each car coming with a preset set of electrical and mechanical faults, features that made owning an Urraco seem like an endless game of automotive roulette. In the end, the Lamborghini Urraco remains in history as a reminder that even legendary manufacturers sometimes make mistakes. Mistake in grandiose ways, creating cars that become iconic not for their achievements, but for their failures. The Urraco is just such a case. It's remembered more for its flaws than its successes, and if that's not irony, then what is? Fourth, how about the Lamborghini Murcielago? This car could be considered the epitome of the idea. If you make it big, loud, and exorbitantly fast, no one will notice that it looks like a steam locomotive from some angles. The Murcielago was introduced in 2001 as the successor to the legendary Diablo and served as proof that Lamborghini had not lost its ability to shock the public and physics. The Murcielago, whose name comes from the Spanish word for bat, somehow seems more like a sinister space pirate ship than a quiet and stealthy creature of the night. This car had a design that could be described as aerodynamics on steroids. Every part of it screamed power and speed, which was certainly part of its charm, but also a reminder that sometimes style crosses the line of common sense. Under the hood of the Murcielago lurked a gigantic 6.2-liter V12 engine, capable of propelling this beast to speeds that made it the perfect car for those who are always late for their own birthdays. However, unless you plan on street racing or have your own track, such a powerful engine may seem a bit excessive for trips to the local supermarket. The Murcielago is also known for its scissor doors fenders that open upwards, which is certainly handy when you park next to a low Lamborghini Gallardo, but can cause some inconvenience in a standard parking lot. These doors aren't just doors, they're a statement about your style, taste, and willingness to surprise passersby every time you get out of your car. While the Murcielago is certainly admirable for its performance and visual impression, its practicality, as with most Lamborghini cars, leaves much to be desired. This car is a perfect example of how engineering prowess and design audition can create something truly exciting, even if that something doesn't always make sense for everyday life. Fifth, meet the Lamborghini Egoista, a car that would surely make Enzo Ferrari shudder in his grave, despite the fact that he never designed a Lamborghini. The Egoista is like a joke that Lamborghini engineers decided to translate into metal, except they forgot to warn you that it was a joke. Introduced in 2013, the Egoista was built to celebrate Lamborghini's 50th anniversary, but it's more like a belated birthday present you'd rather never receive. How could such an esteemed company, known for its luxury sports cars, release something so self-centered and impractical? The Lamborghini Egoista has only one seat, which seems to symbolize pure selfishness. No one belongs here but me. The Egoista's design, which was supposed to be admirable, actually looks more like a midlife crisis expressed in aluminum and carbon fiber. The pointed front end, lots of aggressive angles and jagged edges all give the impression that Lamborghini didn't exactly design it, but carved it out of a piece of metal from a randomly found blueprint of a battle starship. The 600 horsepower V10 engine is certainly impressive, but when you're the only passenger and pilot and captain, who are you going to impress? Unless you're a passerby wondering if they're filming another episode of Star Wars. So, if your idea of fun includes solo rides in an aggressively stylized spaceship that can't be parked anywhere without risking a crowd of baffled gawkers, then the Lamborghini Egoista is your choice. But if you prefer something more traditional and less of an April Fool's joke, it might be worth looking around for something else. After all, not everyone is willing to turn their life into an endless "did you see that?" Sixth, the Lamborghini Jalpa probably deserves the title of one of the least pompous and dullest models in the brand's history, which, given its star status, is quite an accomplishment. Introduced in the early 1980s, the Jalpa was meant to be an affordable alternative to Lamborghini's more powerful and expensive cars, but ended up being a small disappointment on wheels. Not only did the Jalpa had a design that could only be described as not bad to begin with, it also suffered from a lack of true Lamborghini power. Its 3.5-liter V8 engine produced only 255 horsepower, which by Lamborghini standards was almost like not having an engine at all. Perhaps that was okay for a family sedan, but not for something carrying the brand's brand of loaded Italian sports cars. To add insult to injury, the Jalpa's interior design left a lot to be desired. It seems Lamborghini decided that less is worse and had a sale on plastic interior parts. In some places, the Jalpa's interior was more plastic than a typical children's car, which immediately reminded drivers that they were not driving a real Lamborghini, but a budget copy. The Jalpa was also one of the slowest Lamborghini ever, capable of accelerating to 100 km per h in an unfunny 7.3 seconds. While the brand's other models left only dust and admiring glances on the road, the Jalpa seemed to leave only embarrassed smiles and questions like, is that all a Lamborghini can do? So if you ever want to experience what it's like to own a Lamborghini, but without all the joy that comes with driving a true sports car, the Jalpa is your perfect choice. This is the Lamborghini for those who would like to say, I have a Lamborghini, but don't want to be taken seriously. 7th, Lamborghini Urus. Ladies and gentlemen, here is your supercar for the supermarket. Who would have thought that Lamborghini, the symbol of Italian exoticism and automotive elegance, would decide to tackle something as mundane as producing an SUV? But not just any SUV, but in their words, a super SUV. Yes, it's like calling a bulldog a supermodel. Funny and ridiculous. Urus is Lamborghini's attempt to squeeze into the family car market, and although its engine is powerful, it's still more like a trained horse than a wild Mustang. There's 650 horsepower under the hood, which is really impressive. But think about how often you'll be able to use that power while taking the kids to school or stopping by the store for groceries. Given the size and weight of the Urus, perhaps we should have expected more. The interior of the Urus screams luxury, but at the same time reminds you that this is a Lamborghini that has all but forgotten what modesty means. Why would you want Alcantara and carbon fiber when all you need from a car is the ability to load it with bags from IKEA? Calling the Urus the fastest SUV in the world is like bragging that you're the quietest person at a rock concert. Yes, it's fast, but is that why people buy Lamborghini? It wasn't sporting performance that was claimed when we first heard the name Lamborghini, but pure unadulterated raunch and style. Ultimately, the Urus is like an expensive restaurant that suddenly starts serving fast food. It may be delicious, but is that what we loved the original establishment for? The Lamborghini Urus certainly expands the brand's horizons, but at the same time seems to distance it from its roots of speed, passion, and pure adrenaline. 8th, the Lamborghini Diablo is like a kid who wants to prove to everyone that he's the coolest in class, but often ends up being second best. Introduced in the early 90s, the Diablo was supposed to be an emblem of super speed and power. However, despite its impressive 485 horsepower, the Diablo turned out to be more of a demonstration of how supercars shouldn't be designed. On the one hand, its design, which screams, "Look how fast I am," is indeed eye-catching. But on the other hand, this car is incredibly uncomfortable to drive. If you've ever dreamed of a supercar that feels like an elephant in a china shop in the corners, the Diablo is your perfect choice. This car offers all the amenities of the ride: stiff steering, uncomfortable interior, and a noisy engine that reminds you of yourself every second of the ride. Let's not forget about its practicality either. Diablo is like wearing a superhero cape to a business meeting. It looks spectacular, but it is absolutely uncomfortable. The interior of the car resembles the cockpit of a fighter jet, but only if the fighter jet is designed to hell without regard to the needs of the pilot. To enter the Diablo, you may have to learn yoga first in order to successfully fold yourself into its low and narrow doorways. So, if your supercar dream includes not only speed, but also the desire to feel like you're in a torture chamber every time you get behind the wheel, then the Diablo is without a doubt your choice. In this car, every trip turns into a test, and only the most resistant will be able to call it a pleasure. 9th. The Lamborghini Countach has undoubtedly become an icon of the 80s car world, but if you look at it without the rose-colored glasses of nostalgia, it turns out that this car is quite controversial. The Countach is like that famous actor from the old school who impresses everyone with his stories about the good old days. But when it comes to reality, it turns out that he can't even remember his lines. The Countach's design is certainly exciting. Sharp angles, dramatic lines, and gull-wing doors make it unforgettable. However, that same design audacity becomes its curse. Visibility from the cockpit? 0. Practicality of use? None. Ride comfort? Let's leave that to the newer generation of sports cars. The Countach is like walking in stilettos on cobblestone sidewalk. You look amazing until you start moving. Plus, when you consider the handling, the Countach could rival modern tractors. With 375 horsepower or more, which seems impressive on paper, in reality, it often becomes a struggle to control at every corner. On top of that, its tires are as wide as some of its owners' lives, which adds to the challenge of parking in normal city conditions. And even though the Countach has become a symbol of an era and a poster child in a teenager's room, it often leaves a lot to be desired on the road. Its noisy and harsh nature makes every trip an ordeal rather than a pleasure. This is a car for those who are willing to sacrifice comfort for style, and perhaps for those who never really plan to drive it. So if you want a car that will draw stares in a restaurant parking lot, but doesn't require you to engage in a survival rally every time you drive it, the Countach is your perfect choice. It's a legend that's better left on a poster than on the road. 10th. The Lamborghini Veneno is perhaps the ultimate example of how you can turn a car into a traveling carnival. Introduced in 2013 to celebrate the brand's 50th anniversary, the Veneno looks like it was designed not for public roads, but to fight alien invasions. But upon closer inspection, it becomes clear that it's more circus trick than actual supercar. From the outside, the Veneno seems to epitomize all sorts of supercar cliches: sharp angles, aggressive lines, a giant rear spoiler. The design is so overloaded with details that it looks as if it was drawn using the cover of some cheap science fiction novel as a basis. It looks so pretentious that even in the world of Lamborghini, it is already too much. In terms of specs, the Veneno has a 6.5-liter V12 engine with 750 horsepower. Sounds impressive until you remember that for that price, about $4.5 million, you could buy a small island and several yachts. Handling and behavior on the road, to put it mildly, far from what you expect for that kind of money. This is a car that is more meant for a collection than for real-world travel. Interior space of Veneno can be described by one word: Spartan. Sure, there's a lot of carbon fiber and expensive materials, but comfort and convenience remain at the just there level. Even the most avid Lamborghini fans can admit that sitting in Veneno is like sitting on a fashionable but extremely uncomfortable chair. It is beautiful, but you can't stand it for a long time. And let's not forget practicality. Veneno is so low and wide that on usual roads it rather creates problems than solves them. In an attempt to park in a regular parking lot, you risk gathering a whole crowd of curious gawkers and photo enthusiasts, which of course may flatter your ego, but is completely impractical for everyday life. So if you like the idea of owning a car that looks more like a showpiece or art object than a real means of transportation, the Veneno is your perfect choice. This is a car for those who are willing to pay millions to prove that style can be more important than meaning.